Well, I first wanted to be a sister when I was in the 5th grade because I loved the sister who taught me. She was a wonderful person who taught me life is about loving God and loving other people.
I met one of them, the Sister Providence. So she told me about the work of our sister are doing. She said, like, we work with the poor. In my heart, I said, I want to go out to the world and do the work that I can help the poor, you know. That's the initial thought that I have. I said, that's what I want to do. So after I came over here and I fell in love with the sisters, with the work that they are doing, I decided to enter into the community.
When I graduated from high school, I said, I want to be a sister. And my dad says, well, wait a few years. Date, travel, buy your car, do the things you want to do. And then in a year or so, if you want to go, you have my blessing. I thought that was a pretty good idea.
We Sisters of Providence have had the opportunity to be involved in the formation and education of the students who have come to our schools. There's a very well-known statement that says, we know not what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. Those who are involved in education have the great privilege of preparing those who hold the future.
I came to a come and see retreat, and it was absolutely wonderful. By the time I went home, I said to my mother, I really want to be a sister of St. Joseph. They know how to love God, they know how to play, they know how to have a good time, and yet they pray and serve. And that's who I want to be.
In 1975, my parents were refugees from Vietnam to the U.S. So my parents' first home in Orange County was with the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange. And many months later, they were living here. My mom felt kind of sick. So Sister Rosemary took my mom to the doctor. And the doctor said, oh no, you're not sick, you're pregnant. So she was pregnant with me. My whole life, I grew up around the Sisters of St. Joseph. I knew them, and here I am today.
We're all called to love and to love each other. And as Sisters of Providence, we realize that we have the freedom to reach out and love the people we are called to serve.
The beauty of it is both communities, while they have different charisms, a different lens on the gospel, they both have the same heart. It's like, what is the needs of the people? How is God calling us next? And we respond.
Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange belong to a worldwide family of Sisters of St. Joseph that trace their beginnings to the 17th century in France. Father Madai was a French Jesuit working in little areas south of France, and he brought together a group of women in Le Puy.
We, to this day, talk about Father Madai saying, go out into the city, divide it in sections, see what the needs are, and respond to them.
Under the spiritual guidance of Father Madai, the Sisters of St. Joseph were among the first nuns to work outside the confines of a cloistered convent. First in Le Puy, and later throughout southern France, the sisters went out among the people to serve the poor and to teach.
When I think back about our founding in that time, it was a time of destitution, of extreme poverty. And in the Puy, in that area, it was mostly peasants. Most people were illiterate. Many people died before the age of even 1 year.
It was after the religious wars. France was devastated. It was a very bleak time. And here are these women, only one of whom could read and write, that are attracted to this and want to serve God and wanted to serve their neighbor. And I think that spirit really is something that still resonates with me. It's a powerful kind of attractiveness.
As the Sisters of Providence began in Montreal in the middle 1800s, prior to that, our foundress, Emily Tavernier-Gamelin, was a woman who grew up in Montreal and had some sorrows in her life early on. She was quite young, about 5 years old, when her mother died. She had really developed within herself, even before her mother died, attention to the poor and people that would come to the door.
Emily is the one from whom we draw the inspiration and the spirit. She's the one who was given the charism, the gift that we as Sisters of Providence would bring to the church.
Emily and Jean-Baptiste Gamelin exchanged wedding vows in Montreal's original Notre Dame church. Their 3 sons were baptized there. But later, as a grand neo-Gothic cathedral replaced the modest church, Emily's joy transformed into mourning and pain. The deaths of her husband and all 3 of her young sons, all in 5 years' time, plunged her into aching, overwhelming grief.
Emily suffered great losses in her life. And in going to her spiritual director, he gave her a picture of Mary, the Blessed Mother, at the foot of the cross.
Our Mother of Sorrows is an example for us of someone who has suffered deeply, but turns that suffering from inward, deliberating on oneself, to how can one reach out to others. And so that's what Emily did.
The love that she had for the children and her husband then became a love for all the other people that were needy.
And in those people, she saw Jesus. She saw that she was helping to care for Jesus himself as she cared for the poor.
Everyone who had any money always showed that kind of wealth through what they wore and what they had in their homes. And lace was part of that display of where you were sort of in society. So the lace, of course, was not enjoyed by those of the peasant class. It was enjoyed by the upper class.
And that's become a part of our congregational history, because as those 6 women began our congregation, one of the ways they helped support themselves was through lace making. They would gather around with a bulb, with a candle, and they would do lace in order to help make ends meet.
The sisters also taught the art to needy local women, allowing many to avoid prostitution as a means of self-support, an otherwise common fate for those widowed by war and disease. The late 1700s was a time of massive social and political upheaval in France. Widespread poverty flamed popular resentment of the spoils enjoyed by the aristocracy. Churches were closed, and worship was suppressed. Looting and rioting were rampant. It was the people versus the doomed monarchy.
During the French Revolution, sisters were forbidden to work in schools or in hospitals or in those houses of alms unless they took an oath of loyalty to the French Revolution. And many sisters would not do that.
The Sisters of St. Joseph were disbanded, with most going into hiding, several others imprisoned, and a few even making the ultimate sacrifice for their faith, execution by guillotine. One of the sisters, Mother St. John Fontbonne, was spared that gruesome end, being among the last freed from prison. After the Revolution, Mother St. John accepted the bishop's request to establish the Lyon congregation. Before becoming a woman religious, Emily Gamelin immersed herself in working with the Ladies of Charity, serving the poor of Montreal.
Her care of the poor as a laywoman is what we treasure today, because we have most of our ministries are carried out by very dedicated lay people, along with Sisters of Providence. She was a laywoman for 43 years. She was a Sister of Providence for only 7. So I think that's the great legacy she leaves for our lay people.
In 1844, Emily became the first Superior General and foundress of the Sisters of Providence.
So she became Mother Emily Gamelin at that point, and she was a visionary. She was the leader. She attracted other women to join the religious community.
One such woman was 20-year-old Esther Pariseau, whose father, Joseph, presented her to Mother Gamelin for consideration.
He said, I bring you my daughter, and she can cook, and she can sew, and she can use a hammer and tools, and she can do anything, and someday she'll make a very fine superior. So that's what he said, and it proved true.
While studying under Mother Gamelin's guidance, Esther received her name in religion, Sister Joseph, in honor of her father.
The Sisters of St. Joseph came to the United States through St. Louis. So it was the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet. And out of that, we have this marvelous tree.
The sisters established congregations and began serving new neighbors from New York to Minnesota and in a town just outside Chicago. LaGrange, Illinois was the congregational home of a young Mother Bernard Gosselin, who originally hailed from Kansas. In 1912, Mother Bernard and 7 sisters answered the call to venture west, to the wilds of California, to begin the legacy of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange. The group had been told that the boomtown of Sacramento was their destination, but in truth, it was Eureka, a remote logging town on California's northern coast. Following Mother Bernard's example, the sisters responded quickly to the needs of their new neighbors with a spirit of bold faith, foresight, and flexibility. About a month after arriving, the sisters opened the first school in Eureka, and soon thereafter, the Nazareth Academy.
Mother Bernard Gosselin, I think, was a risk taker, a big picture person. She was, I think, not only pragmatic, she also was artistic. She had a variety of sensibilities.
The first few years when she was in California, there was a need in San Francisco, and that is to serve the immigrants, the Chinese immigrants. And that resonates with me because of her flexibility to know and listen to the needs in the community. Because of her, our Sisters of St. Joseph all over, I could feel that there's such a love for the immigrant community, the refugees community.
We had a car, Sisters of St. Joseph in Eureka had a car, which was pretty unusual. And we have a picture of our sisters with little medical bags and masks.
The 1918 flu pandemic was one of the world's worst disease outbreaks, killing more than 50 million people. Despite having only the most rudimentary healthcare training, the sisters compassionately tended to the sick as best they could, often using their Maxwell touring car to make house calls.
Sisters weren't supposed to have cars. So Mother Bernard says, that's okay, we'll have a car, we'll keep it in the garage, and when we need to go out and do the ministry, because in Eureka there's not public transportation, we'll use the car. And if the bishop doesn't like it, well, we'll ask forgiveness.
On a cold December day in 1856, 5 Sisters of Providence arrived at Fort Vancouver, just north of the Columbia River in Washington Territory. After an arduous 36-day winter journey by land and sea, the sisters humbly began a legacy of care and compassion in the rough and tumble Pacific Northwest. Bishop Bourget of Montreal dedicated the mission to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, to be led by its leader and new superior, Mother Joseph of the Sacred Heart.
She and the 4 sisters looked around, and there were immediate needs that were not being met. It's why today she's known as the beginning of health, education, and social services in the Northwest.
The women had virtually no resources, save their deep faith and determination to bring Christ into every life. Local cultures and customs were foreign, as was the language to most of them. Their first so-called convent was the attic of the local bishop's house. Despite the primitive conditions and challenging hardships, the sisters would not be deterred. They quickly opened the territory's first school, then the Northwest's first permanent hospital.
I think the word I would think of is imagination. They were able to imagine children who could have education, patients who could have care, And I think that's what really provided a strong foundation for our community.
The ministries began very quickly. Mother Joseph was a very determined, tenacious woman, and it wasn't long before she was on the Columbia River on horseback, going to the mines to get money to serve these ministries.
The sisters spent weeks traversing hundreds of miles on what they called begging tours, where they pleaded with prospectors for donations of gold flecks and small nuggets to help fund their work, especially building construction.
One of the things that I love about Mother Joseph was she never gave up, no matter what. And then she's funny too, I love her. She knows that she's not beautiful. And then among the group, there was one sister is beautiful. So she sent that sister to the begging tour. She said, because you're beautiful, you should go. You go, and you beg. And then they gave money to the sisters.
Mother Joseph was a builder, grew up at the knee of her father, who was a carpenter, and so she knew how to do all kinds of things that maybe we don't ordinarily associate with women.
She knew wood very, very well. She knew the quality of wood, what each tree could actually produce. And I often think of her seeing that in people.
Across Mother Joseph's 46-year ministry, more than 30 schools, hospitals, orphanages, and homes were founded, including the venerable Providence Academy in Vancouver. Originally a girls' boarding school, the academy was built under the watchful eye of its architect, Mother Joseph herself.
And to look at that structure, it really takes you back to Montreal, because those porches and the whole architecture was Mother Joseph's remembrance of her upbringing in Montreal.
At first, they were not welcomed. They were wearing funny clothes. Who are these strange women coming into town? But I think the work that they did in the flu epidemic convinced the townspeople that these women were good people and that we should support them.
After the flu pandemic, the sisters were asked to take over the local hospital, which had been closed for many years. Mother Bernard eagerly accepted, quickly sending sisters off to nursing and pharmacy schools for training. With the opening of St. Joseph Hospital in Eureka, the cornerstone was laid for healthcare ministries of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange. More hospitals were on the horizon, as were more schools in new territories. Mother Bernard recognized the need to expand the work of the congregation, to touch more souls, so the decision was made to move south.
By 1922, Mother Bernard had moved the Mother House, the central administration of the community, to Orange in Southern California. And it's those two areas, Eureka and Orange, that became the places of outreach for our congregation.
The move to Southern California brought invigorating growth and wider influence to the ministries of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange. 5 came from Montreal, 8 from LaGrange, and against all odds, those pioneering nuns were instrumental in shaping healthcare, education, and social services in the West. In the ensuing years, hundreds of Sisters of Providence and Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange have humbly continued their missions to serve the poor and vulnerable, to serve their neighbors both here and abroad.
The Sisters of St. Joseph and the Sisters of Providence have so much in common in terms of our heritage. So many similarities, their travels, their commitment to the poor, not knowing exactly what they were going to do, and ended up, starting schools and hospitals.
There's so much common ground. It's deep and it's wide, and it's a place where I think we can flourish.
I think trust in God's providence is the deepest legacy. Even though times are very difficult, if we are true to our service to the poor, God will continue to bless us.
That whole continuum of care, we have the ability to make that happen. in very unique and beautiful ways all across the western part of our country. It's ours to do, and we need to do it because that's what we came together to do.
We don't know what we might be doing in the future together, that we're willing to come together as a new organization and explore that together. To me, that's really quite an amazing possibility.
The lace isn't finished, it continues, and each of us are those threads. Each of us help create that beautiful tapestry of life with our lives and within Providence St. Joseph Health.